So I went to Holiday Matsuri, and it was good. It wasn't as easy as just waltzing into the building and finding the appropriate room to get my badge. But with the help of a Voltron cosplayer who was really nice, I managed. I took a picture of the chandelier in this room. In fact, in all the panels I went to, there were chandeliers, just like this one. This one was special just because it was the bluest of them all. This exact room was where I got my badge, and the line took a while. Not too long, though. I was not a convention maestro, meaning that I had a bit of difficulty navigating where I was supposed to go. I had only gone to NakaCon 2015 and NakaCon 2016 beforehand. Those were both really good conventions, but the way that this place was designed was way more grandiose than either of the places where that convention was hosted. My initial objective was to find one of my online friends from League of Legends and meet them in real life. The idea itself was alluring, but I had no idea where to find her, and I also did not think to get her phone number before coming to the convention. Awkward. All hope wasn't lost, though. I had a second objective in mind, and this was something that I've always done since NakaCon. I would go to the panels and make my own fun. The first panel I went to was called "You Can't Cosplay That," parentheses, "Oh yes I can." Fresh on my mind was the fact that I didn't really adequately prepare a good cosplay, let alone one of anybody I wanted to cosplay as. However, since I insisted on wearing a Dr. Seuss hat and sunglasses to the convention, I was able to pass off as cosplaying as Filthy Frank. In between panels, I would go to the game room for solace. There was also a manga library in this area, and it was really good. However, whenever I went to these general areas, the main thing I would play is Mage Quit, specifically the demo that the developers were showing off in the game room. Playing as an Earth Mage primary was super fun. The next panel was the Tiny Waves panel. The thing about this panel was I did not find the panel room except on accident. What had happened was that the musicians that make up the Tiny Waves group of video game remixers, they pretty much had to swap panel rooms with someone else. I don't remember who they swapped with, is the thing. After that, they decided to make their Tiny Waves panel short. Theirs was the shortest by being only around 30 to 40 minutes. I did get to meet them, and all of the Tiny Waves people are really good guys. On top of that, I very, very loudly insisted they play a Press Garden remix upon my discovery that they had a Sonic Mania remix album. Unfortunately, I don't think they have a Titanic Monarch remix, to my utmost knowledge, but I still follow them on YouTube, Twitter, etc., and I would advise y'all do the same. After the Tiny Waves panel, I decided to do a thing for people. Since the Tiny Waves guys were nice enough to give me their social medias, I would give mine in return. But I wanted to draw something for them, and during part of their panel, before the Press Garden remix was shown to me, I decided I would draw Wild Woody. Initially, I had only seen Oni play the game, but I do remember tinkering with a Sonic CD in one of my neighbors' houses in New Jersey, and Wild Woody was the game I presumably chose. Something within my soul called to Wild Woody, and I guess vice versa. Because of the awkward situation with the lack of my online friend's phone number, I decided to make a path form. I would do this by drawing pylons and poros on chalkboards. Well, I only drew it on one. And try to go into as many panels and other things as possible so that my existence would be known to the entirety of Hallmat. My walking around probably didn't do the staff any favors, and a few of them at different intervals for the 3 days that I was there basically asked if I was okay whilst I was walking around. I felt awkward about it, mostly because I imagine I was just a very weird person to be around. I always am, I always will be. Coming to the convention alone was probably an okay idea at the time, but thinking about it now, I probably should have put more effort into having established contacts with 2 of my online friends who I met. At the time, though, I found people who would humor me, including an officer diva who gave me a hug upon recognizing who I was by name. I had written Pylon vertically on my badge, and a Jotaro Kujo cosplayer who I hung out with for the 3rd panel, which was incidentally JoJo themed. But before that, I hung out with them in the vendor room, and then trailed away when they had things to do. It was at the vendor room where I finally met my online friend. And the second online friend not long after, because we exited the vendor room, though I did take a partial interest to some shiny things I found. The chief problem being that I didn't want to make any bad investments, and I had strongly considered buying some jewelry for me friend. I didn't know her birthstone, though. Turns out it's Peridot. We went to Central Pantry to group up and catch up on life. We were caught up, and it took a while. I think one of my friends was in a hurry to finish her cosplay for the day after, and I could hardly blame her. I hung out with the second friend for a bit. Both of my online friends also had a plethora of other friends they were hanging out with, and I noticed this along the way of just walking around with the second friend. It was fun, and our conversations were quite demonstrably chipper. I also was just very, 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 very happy to see them. It had been too long since I last spoke with the second friend. They're really busy IRL, so at any rate, though, our paths eventually did diverge, and we promised to find each other again before the night was done. That's when the 3rd panel started, and it was an intro to JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Basically no spoilers. But a good way to introduce the series overall, and the panel hosts were really nice to me, as was the Jotaro Kujo cosplayer I sat next to. He was awesome. It was the same guy from earlier in the vendor room. I do hope he got that Rias Gremory body pillow he wanted. The 3rd panel ended early, so I decided to change my destination to Mikado's Steakhouse. I had alerted the first friend and was going to talk to the second friend before heading into the Mikado's, but I did not find her until after. I eventually found my friend at around the same place near the Mikado's. It's just that it took me a few minutes longer, and she was also looking for me. Which then meant that I had done goofed, something that I had already come to the conclusion of when I first set into the Mikado's without her. Then when I tried to recap everything to her, I recognized I was unwittingly holding her up because her friends were walking way ahead of her. So I decided to let the matter drop, because I wanted to explain everything. But at the same time, I felt like a liability. Then I went to go to a last panel, just to clear my head. The final panel I went to that particular Friday was a panel on paneling. It was a very good panel, and I could tell right away. The guy who ran the panel was a pro, and I would recommend him for all panels, except there are some that he transparently doesn't want to do. At any rate, though, there was one major snag, but he overcame it like a champ, and that was that the rooms that the panel room were in were not the panel rooms in the panel section which is called the panel room, were not very well soundproofed, and this would come to be a bane later. In particular, he had to compete with the Alexander Hamilton panel next door, which sang loudly and proudly, which is fine. I'm a U.S. historian. I know people can get their U.S. history on. It wasn't a musical based on the civil rights movement in the 1960s, so it wasn't my cup of tea. That didn't stop them. Why would it? At any rate, though, he did a really good job, and I would recommend him. I alerted friend 1 that I was going to leave day 1 early, and she bade me good night. That would leave day 2. I'm not cliffhangering this at all. The first day 2 panels I went to were back to back. The first panel was called Cosplaying with an Invisible Illness. It fell under the same principles as the previous You Can't Cosplay That, Oh Yes You Can panel. So, for all intents and purposes, that's what it was. It was just aimed towards people like me. The second panel of day 2 was called Nerds with an Invisible Illness. This panel basically talked more about general convention going. It was quite helpful. The only downside I saw was that we were competing with the Japanese pop music karaoke contest, and boy were they loud. I almost went outside to give those guys an earful, but I was stopped by the panel hosts of Nerds with an Invisible Illness, who told me they were fine. With this, I seemed to understand. I ended up empathetically absorbing the emotions of everyone around me for both of these panels in a row, and it nearly put me out of commission entirely for the rest of the con. I took some time after the second panel to walk around. I had played some Mage Quit and was in the vendor room, and then I came out of the vendor room. I accidentally stumbled upon my first friend's cosplay group. I felt a strong urge to drink bleach, to borrow a phrase from Jeremiah Isaiah. However, I instead just hung around for a little bit, wondered what the commotion was all about, and then met one of her friends that way. She, the friend, left her stuff on the floor, and I immediately dove down to make eye contact with it. I had been told, indirectly, by one of her friends mentioning it, in I believe a joking fashion, that I never took my eyes off it. That's the part that made me want to drink bleach, by the way. Yeah. I believe there wasn't much else to it. The friend and I talked for a little bit, and then we parted ways not long after. For lunch at day 2, I just ended up going to Central Pantry again. I wanted to originally go to High Velocity just to make sure I went to at least every restaurant once, but that plan was dashed when I ended up not being in the mood. The third panel was Sega, Welcome to the Next Level, The Return. Ultimately, this became my least favorite panel, because the panel hosts shared the same attitude about most Sonic games that were 3D that a lot of my enemies did from long before. Yeah, during the time I was exiled from the Sonic fandom. So ultimately, I was just reminded of said exile, even though, for a majority of it, they spent it talking about not Sonic games. They would throw in wisecracks every now and then, and it was a disorganized mess, as far as I could remember. However, I could see that the panel hosts put in a lot of effort, and I, in kind, gave them probably the nicest Wild Woody hand drawing that I could give to all the panels. After such a panel, I decided to get some food. My intended destination was Hawk's Landing, because boy, do I love steakhouses. But unfortunately, it was closed. So I had to go somewhere else. So I saw friend number 1 again after my disappointment with Hawk's Landing. She was with her posse on Broadway, and I played catch-up with her while getting to introduce myself to her friends. It was a good time for a little bit, but I recognized we had different destinations in mind. That said, she did tell me to get something to eat, her wish is my command, so I ended up settling for Starbucks because everything else was too jam-packed. Afterwards, I ran into a Roman Torchwick cosplayer. He was lost looking for the Ruby Ball, so I took him to the Ruby Ball. I was tempted to go inside with him and declare that the dance floor was claimed in the name of Shane Newville, but I am not Il Cartographer. I was cosplaying as Filthy Frank. It would look really, really awkward. And even if I wanted to still be in character as Filthy Frank, and I imagine he would do this sort of thing, there was a primal voice in me in my soul, that still told me, no, don't do that. I walked away from the Ruby Ball with an air of triumph in helping that Roman Torchwick guy. I mean, the only other instances where I'd have that moment of triumph would be if I were escorting a Pyranikos or Adam Taurus cosplayer, but I didn't see a whole lot of either, much to my chagrin. There were a few good Pyras, but I saw them the morning after. But before that, I spent the remainder of day 2 wandering around. I ended up just stumbling upon the game room hallway and just chilling around. I was gonna go into a 4th panel, the dramatic reading of terrible anime fanfiction, but that panel was full. So I ended up just at the after party. I had to wait in line to show my ID to them, because apparently Cosplay Deviants was hosting this after party, and I had no idea who they were before coming to Hallmat. There was a whole lot of barely anything that happened in day 3, and I half expected as much, given at NakaCon it was the same deal. A lot of stuff happened on Friday and Saturday that didn't happen on Sunday. That said, there was at least one panel I went to, and it was a voice acting panel with Nathan Sharp, Christina V, and a few other people whom I think I should have known from League of Legends, maybe. But, I had no idea who any of them were, aside from those two. And I kinda only knew Nathan Sharp as that one rap guy that my ex recommended me. Not even kidding on that. So, I waited at the hotel lobby, because I came to day 3 early, and then I walked around and saw some Christmas trees that I had not seen the night before. So I took some pictures of those Christmas trees, walked around with doing that, and then just killed some time until that panel started. It was a good panel. I kinda just paid attention mostly when Christina V talked, and shrugged the rest of the way through. I was a bit on the tired side from the past 2 days, so I nearly conked out right then and there as I sat down on the comfy chair. I decided to give it some more time and just hang out in the game room. I got to play some Street Fighter V, and I've got some hidden potential, but I'm not part of the Viscant World Order, so I don't know if I can harness that potential without forking so much money over to play SF5. That's what I'm most afraid of. After the game room, I almost decided to get something at Central Pantry, but ran into friend 2, got her number, then hung out with friends 1 and 2 for the final hour, before deciding to vamoose early, since neither of them were going to the closing ceremonies, and that was the last thing to do. I escorted friend 2 to the vendor room so she could get something cool. I hope she found what she wanted. And that's the end of Hallmat, right then and there. Yeah, the only Easter egg I've got is this drawing of Wild Woody I did for a guy while I was at the game room. Or at least the hallway, rather. So, yeah, the video's over. Do whatever you need to.